So Krishma and Reese here back after our initial ride for Reese on the 300XC. So tell me, what did you like about the bike and how did you find it rode?
Well, coming from a 2022 300XC, I just felt completely natural on this bike. And there's a few little things that we'll talk about, but the bike just feels really ergonomic. I've never ridden a bike before that you can just jump on and feel that you're at home. Everything's in the right place, the footbed positioning. I adjusted the rear brake up so I could touch it a little bit easier and put my brake tip thing on, just the tip. And even the handlebars, that when you're just sitting there and trying to work out where your bar position, everything's going to be, they felt a little bit odd, but then once you get riding, they felt really good. They definitely feel a little bit wider than the old bars that used to come standard on the KTMs. But the bike feels really, really good. It's torquey, it's very progressive, it's got a very linear power delivery. Everyone raves about the power delivery on the TBI bikes, and now riding one and riding the 250 and the 300, it is really, really good. It's natural. It doesn't feel like a two-stroke. It doesn't feel like a four-stroke. It feels almost like an electric bike with gears.
I agree, yeah.
It just builds up, super smooth. You never get in a position where you're trying to grab the brakes because the bike's got a little bit out of control. It's always just there. Everything just seems to be perfect. I did notice the front feels quite a bit heavier than the 22. The forks are obviously very similar, but the way the frame is now, the front tends to be a little bit heavier, and that's not a bad thing because with the air fork, the front of the bikes was quite light. So you're always sort of controlling the front end wheelies all the time.
Mm-hmm. And deflecting a little bit too if you weren't, right over in the right position.
Exactly, but
yeah.
This thing, you can, on the TBI bikes with the new frame, it just tends to, with a little bit more weight but biased onto the front, it feels sort of a cross between a motocross bike and an enduro bike, where the enduro bikes were traditionally a little bit lighter on the front end and the motocross bikes are quite heavy front orientated. This bike feels very, very neutral and very natural, and it felt, at first it was like, oh, it's a bit weird, I got to give it a little bit more throttle to get over stuff to keep the front end up. But once you adapt to that, it feels really, really good.
Yeah.
The only thing that I found with the bike that was a bit uncomfortable for me is I'd probably end up changing to the 9mm brake master cylinder. The 10mm is you're just pulling in too much clutch at once. And we just rode for about 3.5 hours, just technical terrain, logs, crazy uphills, switchbacks, ridiculously steep downhills with logs in them, uphill and downhill. Everything's greasy, it's wet at the moment here. So it just feels incredible. It feels really natural. You get a lot of confidence really quickly with this bike, whereas you're not having to adapt to the bike, it's automatically adapting to it. So I felt that this is absolutely the best bike so far. Super stoked with it. It just does everything properly. The motor feels amazing. It's so linear, and I think that's to do with the power valve being a lot better controlled than what it used to be. It comes in just absolutely linear with the way the power is delivering. And yes, it has a good little top end hit.
Yep.
It's still got that two-stroke bite up at the top, which is great, but all the way up there, it's just a really nice linear torque curve. It's really, really good.
I agree, and I think with the way that they redesigned the frame and where they placed the motor with the centrifugal force, like it just kind of feels like the motor, it feels balanced in the bike. Like it doesn't feel like it's top heavy or bottom heavy, and every time you come around a corner, it just feels like the bike will naturally kind of want to stand up on its own, where sometimes I found on some of the previous bikes it just felt a little bit all over the place, and if your suspension wasn't quite dialed in properly, it just didn't quite feel right. And this bike just feels good, right?
They've really put a lot of work into making sure that the chassis, that the frame is doing exactly what it's meant to do, and that's why it feels so natural, I think. And I'm about 93 kilograms. I'm not a lightweight rider. The bikes are usually set up for about 87 kilograms. I haven't touched the suspension other than winding off a little bit of the compression dampening on the front. The suspension on it is really, really, really good. The air fork has, you said in the previous video that there was a little bit of harshness in the mid-stroke. I
Yes.
didn't find that because I'm a bit heavier and I'm going through that stroke much easier.
Using it, yeah.
But this is by far the best air fork that has ever come out on a bike ever. It feels like a spring fork, but it has that progressiveness of the air fork. So all the benefits of a spring fork, except it's lightweight, which is great, and it also has a progressiveness, so you don't really have to worry about hard bottoms out, hard G outs. I found that going up over logs, preloading it did everything it was meant to do. Yeah, and how does it go with a lighter rider? You haven't changed really anything on yours, have you?
No, and this is honestly the first time that I've ever been able to ride a bike just right from the showroom floor. I usually have such a hard time being like, I'm 140 pounds usually with my gear, about 150 pounds, so already we're a little bit lighter than what the bikes are rated for, and the suspension is always too stiff. I'm still struggling a little bit with reaching the ground. Obviously, I still have the tall stock seat.
Just got to get better balance, right?
Yeah, and it does force you a little bit to kind of practice those things. You know, obviously sometimes your feet disappear underneath you, but for the most part, I'm really blown away at how well the suspension has performed. I find that it's really progressive. It's quite plush. I did change the settings in the air fork, so in the KTM manual they actually have a couple of different settings that you can try. So I tried it on their comfort setting just out of curiosity, because I usually send out my suspension to RMR Suspension in Abbotsford, just to kind of get that revalved and, you know, just set up for my weight.
Yep.
I haven't done anything since, and I'm really impressed at how plush it is. I think for any rider above 140 pounds upwards, it's perfect. It's very progressive. It has a little bit of stickiness, I feel, in that mid-stroke in the front fork for me. I think that's just because I'm a little bit lighter. But other than that, I'm super blown away at how good it feels, and the chassis just feels so good. The bike just absorbs everything. Like, I've ridden the XCWs and the XCs before, and the XCW always appealed to a lot more like enduro terrain riders compared to the cross country, whereas I find that you can ride this thing anywhere. I feel like you could do hard enduro in it.
Absolutely,
you know, the gearing's a little bit different, but with the mapping, like I use it in the white map, so it's a little bit dialed down, and it feels fantastic.
Yeah, well, I rode with the green map all day today. I didn't even try the white map. We'll call it the white map. I did it on the green map all day. I found that the power delivery was really nice and smooth, but combined with the suspension, and I haven't, other than winding off a little bit of compression dampening on the front forks, I haven't touched it. So I'm going to check after I've cleaned the bike up. I'm going to check what the clicker settings are, and I'll post that down in the comments. But it's interesting that the linkage on this, I think it feels like a different ratio than the previous bikes.
It does.
The idea of linkage is to sort of separate yourself from the bumps, and the PDS makes you feel a lot more of what you're going over, and you can preload to get over obstacles. So the PDS has its place and the linkage has its place, but I think that they've found a really good balance with this bike. I've always been a linkage fan. When you're booting through whoops or really rutted out roads, I find that the linkage separates you from what you're riding over, whereas the PDS can just do a little bit of funny things sometimes. But I have been able today to just, with the stock settings, preload and jump over stuff super easy with it. And once you get used to the weight of the front end, with being the dynamics being a little bit heavier front biased, once you get used to that, popping up over logs and everything is really easy.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, kind of comparing the TBI to the TBI 2, I don't find the front end quite as heavy because that snappy bottom end, it doesn't have that delay. Yeah. For me, I find that even though it is a little bit heavier in the front end, it comes up really, really fast. Like I don't find there's an issue, you know, getting that weight up.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to struggle really in any gear, just to build that linear power up. Yes, of course, if you're in the wrong gear, you've got to slip the clutch more, but it still builds that power really clean. Yeah. I thought the bike might be a bit burbly running the oil in the fuel, the premix, going back to premix. And that's another video that we'll probably do. It's very, very crucial that you run a specific oil and you don't put too much oil in. A lot of two-stroke people, when they're mixing fuels, they actually put too much oil in, and that's going to make the bike feel a little bit boggy. You're going to have to clean it out sometimes. How did you find the hill climbs? Like, we hit some pretty good loamy dirt hills, which you don't usually get to do.
Yeah, like for the terrain that I ride most of the time with McNutt, we have, you know, more rocky terrain, and there's always lots of traction. And out here, the dirt is so different, and with all the rain and the water and stuff, it was very, very slimy. But it took me a little bit, like a couple of tries, to really get into that like power band. But once you're in that power band, that bike just pulls hard, like incredible, like feathering the clutch. Like, to me, it's my skill kind of lacked on that side, like not being able to get up a couple of the hills, but for the most part, that bike just tracked, like it had the power to get you up.
Yeah, I'm thinking that the balance of the bike and the way they've angled the motor is really improved its hill climbing ability as well, because you can change direction, but it'll also just track really well. I don't know, it's really hard to explain this bike because it feels so natural.
You have to ride it, I think.
You really have to ride it, and you know, we're lucky to have these bikes and be able to get out there and test them and swap in between the bikes and try them out. As I say, the clutch feels a little heavy to me because I'm used to a really light clutch running a 9mm. I'll probably change that, but that's personal preference. Some people run a Midwest lever that changes the ratio, but the Midwest lever's got a bit of a square feel to it, so it's like pulling on a hockey stick sort of thing,
kind of,
right?
Yeah,
it's not got that nice feel to it. The foot pegs are great. At first I thought, am I going to take the IMS pegs and try and put them on the newer bike? No, these pegs they're grippy, they're big. I did catch my boot once, but look, I catched a boot on the other pegs as well anyway, sometimes when you're taking your foot off. I don't really like the start-stop switch on one. I did like the separate one. It's a little sort of clumsy to hit the
It takes
start.
a while to get used to, Yeah,
and I never really use the stop switch, so I usually just let the clutch out and stall the bike. So for me, just having the start button there on its own would probably be a little bit better, but I think if I just tilt it so it's more focused just on the start button, I think that would be the winner on it.
Absolutely.
They talked about the bike feeling a little bit narrower, but I didn't really feel any difference between the 22. I don't know.
Between the 22 and the 23, I don't think there's a lot of difference. Like, it feels like it's a little bit more narrow up towards the tank.
Right.
But, you know, for the part where you're really squeezing your leg central, it's not too much difference. But if you're comparing it to, I'd say, 2018 and before that, you'd probably it does feel narrower to me.
Yeah, I didn't really notice that, but what I did notice, I wasn't getting my boot caught behind the foot peg. Because the previous bikes, you're always catching your damn boot on the plastics.
Yeah.
I didn't do it once today.
Yep. And I think it really helps because you can actually see where the plastic tucks in a little bit under.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Like,
it's got a little bit of an edge on a radius on it.
Yeah, so, and I had that same issue because there'd be so many times you go to just, you know, pull your foot out to dab or whatever, and you get it caught and you end up tipping over.
Yep.
And not once have I done that on this bike.
It's weird because when you think back to the ride and what happened and what didn't happen and what usually happens, it's so natural. The bike is natural to ride. You really have to get on one, borrow a friend's, borrow, don't steal. Don't do that.
Beg who you have to and give it a try.
No stealing, but you really got to ride this bike. Mountain View Motorsports in Chilliwack, BC, he knows these bikes are good. He got a ton of these bikes in. He's selling them like crazy. So if any dealers say they don't have any stock, call up Brian at Mountain View Motorsports. We'll put a link down in the caption. And
wealth of knowledge. Brian's been in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. He's a racer. I used to race with him. And he's been in the industry a really, really long time. So having access to these bikes and having that backup from Brian is really invaluable.
Absolutely. And even with the service department, one of the little issues that they were having initially, if you actually bumped the start button while the bike was running, it would flash a code. And they have resolved the issues since then, so there's actually a new updated map. And even when I went by the dealership, they got me in right away, reflashed it for me while I waited, and it didn't cost me anything. You know, they really helped out their customers, you know, having really good customer service, and they just know what they're talking about. So definitely a great place to.
Yeah,
go
really
stop
good to
in.
have a dealer that's on board with the racer guys. Because a lot
Yep.
of dealers, they don't race, they just want to sell bikes. Brian's really immersed in the industry and really immersed in the racing as well, so that's really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, overall this bike is the most natural, easiest bike to ride straight out of the box. Like literally the only thing I've done is changed a little brake tip on it because I really like to be able to reach that brake on the steep downhills. We did some really quite good downhills to do sweeping turns. Didn't catch the boot. Suspension feels great. The brakes, of course, carry over brakes from before. The seat was a little slippery. I don't know. Do you get a little slippy on the seat?
A little bit. I definitely think it's an improvement on the previous year's seats that they had.
On the gas side.
Yes.
Yeah, because the KTM had a pretty good texture on the
Yeah.
22 seat. I found that a little bit better. And today we weren't, like, it wasn't
soaking wet.
It wasn't soaking wet. So I did slide around on the seat a little bit. I think for most people, they'll get away with it. It won't be a problem at all. And I think in drier weather, it's just not going to be an issue either.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, people, any questions? Just bung some questions down there. I'm usually right onto it and answer them. Yeah, love it.
That's amazing.
Great.
Yeah.
Get some mooses into the tires, and I think the bike's just ready to go. I couldn't see anything else other than the 9mm Master for me. There's nothing else I'd rather do.
Honestly, yeah, me neither. I think other than a few protection items, just to make sure, you know, your radiators and all the big components and calipers and whatnot is all protected. Other than that, you know, if you want to go the route of, you know, redoing your suspension, that's personal preference, I think, at the end of the day. But for anybody walking into a dealership, you can pick up this bike and go ride it and probably have an incredible time.
Much fun as anyone's ever going to have.
Exactly.
There's still a place for the suspension guys if you're a really heavy rider or you're a really lightweight rider. Places like RMR will tailor that bike to you, so you're going to be assured that it's going to be set up for you. I know I'm a little bit heavy for this bike, but quite honestly today, we didn't do a lot of high speed, like sort of motocrossy type stuff, so I wasn't really getting down into the stroke of the suspension as much. But all that sort of stuff can be adjusted, and of course people can spend the money on that as well. But I think just your normal regular servicing. The air forks do tend to suck a little bit of water in, so if you're riding through winter, you really got to make sure that you're servicing those every sort of 20 hours or so. Even if it's just an oil change. I have the tool to undo the cap, and I just do it myself. And I get the oil from Rod at RMR because he has a really, really good low stiction. I think the word is stiction.
Yeah.
It's a really low stiction KYB oil that he uses.
Yeah.
So that was really impressive too. So yeah, winner.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly,
Perfect.
I would have to say for me personally,
Best bike ever.
100% best bike KTM's ever made. So.
And I would say the same thing too. And I have had 8 TBIs, and this is the first TBI, and I'm really impressed with it. So go out and buy.
Yeah. Cool.
Perfect.
All right. Have a great day, guys.